Good afternoon. Welcome to the Analyst. Today we'll be taking up 7 newspaper articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express and discussing them. The handout for the same will be available in the description of this video for your kind perusal. Please have a look at that. The first article that we'll take up is related to India's relations with Australia and New Zealand, as India has signed a defense pact with New Zealand and also agreed to deepen its cooperation with Australia. The second article is related to India-Afghanistan relations, as a write-up in the paper has claimed that India is building closer ties with the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, as seen through the meeting between the Foreign Secretary of India and a Taliban minister in Dubai. Additionally, we'll take up 5 articles in the simplified, which will be helpful in your prelims and mains preparation. Now, the first article is related to India's relations with Australia and New Zealand. The global geopolitics is evolving at a breakneck speed. For example, the US President Trump keeps on threatening with the imposition of tariffs. So India wants to safeguard its interests, and hence it wants to explore the bilateral cooperation, bilateral negotiations with various countries. Even the House panel has recommended that India should come up with a formal and comprehensive national policy strategy. So India has signed a defense pact with New Zealand and also agreed to deepen its cooperation with Australia. So we will discuss the key areas of cooperation between India and New Zealand and also India and Australia, and the challenges that India-Australia relations face and the suggestions in this regard. This is important in GS2 under the topic Effect of Politics and Policies of Developed and Developing Countries on India's Interests and Indian Diaspora. First, India's relations with New Zealand. First, let's have a look at the map of New Zealand. New Zealand comprises of 2 main islands, the North Island and the South Island in the South Pacific Ocean. In the North Island lies the capital of New Zealand, the southern tip of North Island, that is Wellington, and Auckland is the largest city in the North Island, and Christchurch is the largest industrial city in the South Island of New Zealand. About 6% of New Zealand's population is from the Indian origin, because the Indian origin people also started settling in New Zealand ever since the European settlements started in the 18th century. Now, what is the history of relationship between India and New Zealand? The 2 countries have had friendly relations, although not very warm relationship, because India conducted the nuclear tests in 1998. They were criticized by New Zealand because New Zealand always had a very strong anti-nuclear stance. It even declared itself a nuclear-free zone. That is, it effectively prohibited even the US nuclear ships from its ports, and it even was not willing to allow India to be a member of the nuclear suppliers group, which is needed by India. But now there is a change in the geopolitics in the entire Indo-Pacific region. In 2020, New Zealand even came up with a strategy document, India-New Zealand 2025, investing in the relationship. So what are the key areas of cooperation between India and New Zealand now? Geopolitically speaking, both the countries have shared interests in the Indo-Pacific. Both the countries want an open, inclusive, stable and a prosperous Indo-Pacific. Both countries want the freedom of navigation in the region as per the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas. Both countries are aware of the changing security dynamics. Both are wary of the growing Chinese influence in the region. China even wants to build a China-Pacific island bloc, that is the bloc of the Pacific island countries who are supporting China, and both India and New Zealand are against the Chinese overtures in the South Pacific region especially. And now India is even improving relations with the US allies, especially in the Indo-Pacific region, New Zealand included. And both the countries have shared concerns, for example, the rise of China in the South Pacific region. When we look at the other areas of cooperation, there is economic cooperation between India and New Zealand, as the bilateral trade between India and New Zealand has exceeded $1 billion. And the interesting part is India enjoys a trade surplus with New Zealand. That is, India exports more to New Zealand than it imports from New Zealand. India exports various products including textile, pharma products, gems and jewelry, etc. The two countries have also put in place a customs cooperation arrangement to ensure an easier flow of goods between the two countries and ensured a direct air connectivity also between New Delhi and Wellington. And the air service agreement that was in place between the two countries has been updated recently. The two countries have cooperation to promote education and to promote mobility between the two countries. For example, the India and New Zealand are seeking to expedite the visa processes that will help the Indian students who are studying in New Zealand, and they are also negotiating a mobility agreement. If a mobility agreement is signed between India and New Zealand, it will ensure the easier flow of the professionals. For example, the dairy managers, for example, the people involved in information and communication technology, the IT professionals, etc. The two countries cooperate in climate and energy as well. For example, New Zealand also argues for climate action and the action by the developed countries, especially to ensure that climate change does not adversely affect the developing countries, and seeking climate justice through the principles of common but differentiated responsibilities. New Zealand has joined the International Solar Alliance as well. The two countries cooperate at various forums, the multilateral forums including the East Asia Summit, the ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting Plus, the ASEAN Regional Forum. New Zealand also supports India's membership of the United Nations Security Council. The two countries seek for the reforms in the United Nations in general. And New Zealand is also vocal about the nuclear disarmament across the globe. When we come to the people-to-people ties, 6% of New Zealand's population is of the Indian origin, and there is potential to explore tourism as well as the exchange of students between India and New Zealand. Now, the prime ministers of the two countries, India and New Zealand, met recently. The outcomes of the meeting include the launching of negotiations for a free trade agreement. There is not yet a free trade agreement between India and New Zealand. Also, the two countries have launched negotiations for signing a mobility agreement to ease the movement of professionals. New Zealand has joined the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative. New Zealand has also joined the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. An MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, has been signed on the defense cooperation as well as an MOU on horticulture. The Memorandum of Understanding on horticulture will ensure that the knowledge and research between the two countries on horticulture can be shared. It will also help in the development of post-harvest infrastructure and development of the value addition in horticulture. The Education Cooperation Agreement has been signed between the Ministry of Education in India and New Zealand. A memorandum of cooperation has also been signed in the sports sector. So the India-New Zealand relations are moving forward in cooperation. Now, coming to the India-Australia relations, first let's have a look at the map of Australia. Australia is the largest island and the smallest continent in the world. To the northwest, it is bounded by the Timor Sea, and to the north, it is bounded by the Gulf of Carpentaria. In the northeast of Australia lies the Great Barrier Reef. In the south, it is bounded by the Great Australian Bight. When we look at the physiography of Australia, in the eastern part lies the Great Dividing Range. In the western part is the Western Plateau, and in the central part are the Central Lowlands. When we look at the drainage, it comprises of two main rivers in Australia, that is the Murray-Darling Basin. Now, what is the significance of Australia for India? Australia is like a gateway for India to the Pacific region, because Australia enjoys immense influence in the Pacific region. For example, it influences various islands like Kiribati Islands, Solomon Islands, etc. And both the countries argue for a free, open, inclusive and a stable Indo-Pacific region, which is necessary for the growth of both the countries. There is a significant amount of Indian diaspora in Australia. 3% of Australian population is of the Indian origin, and geostrategically looking, Australia is important for us because Australia supports India's membership in both the Nuclear Suppliers Group as well as the United Nations Security Council. Australia can ensure energy security also for India, as it has significant LNG reserves, liquefied natural gas, which India can import from Australia. And both the countries need to cooperate to ensure that they are able to tackle the dragon in the room. That is, both are able to tackle China also. And both argue for a rule-based international order. Now, what has been the highlights of the relations between India and Australia? When we look at it historically, the India Trade Office was established in Australia in Sydney even before independence in 1941. The two countries elevated the relations to a strategic partnership level in 2009. In 2014, Prime Minister Modi visited Australia for the first time for the G20 summit in Brisbane, and he became the first Indian to address the Australian Parliament. In 2020, both countries again upgraded the relationship to that of a comprehensive strategic partnership. And in 2021, the first India-Australia 2+2 foreign and defense ministerial dialogue was held. In 2022, the India-Australia annual summit was also institutionalized. It was also the 75th anniversary of the India-Australia diplomatic relations. Now, what are the key areas of cooperation between India and Australia? When we look at it from the perspective of defense and security, like we learned, both the countries have a comprehensive strategic partnership in place, and they have also put in place a mutual logistics support agreement, and both are part of the Quad as well. The other two members of Quad being Japan and USA, and they conduct joint exercises also together, for example, the Malabar exercises. When we look at it from an economic point of view, again the cooperation is significant. For example, the bilateral trade between the two countries is more than $24 billion in fiscal year 24. Also, Australia is India's 13th largest trading partner. India is Australia's 9th largest trading partner. Both the countries have significant investments in each other's domain. For example, Indian investment in Australia is close to $20 billion, and Australian investment in India is also close to $14 billion. India's exports to Australia have been increasing. In the past 5 years, they have increased by 66%. Both the countries have put in place the India-Australia Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement. In 2022, it was signed. What does it comprise of? It comprises of the duty-free access. It provides for zero duty on 96% of Indian goods exported to Australia. It also relaxes the norms in the services to ensure that the trade in services is carried out easily and there is movement of the professionals. Likewise, it provides for the rules of origin also, so that any third country is not misutilizing the provisions of the duty-free access between India and Australia. The two countries are now negotiating for a comprehensive economic cooperation agreement as well. Also, the economies of India and Australia are complementary in nature. For example, Australia has immense natural resources. It has rare earth minerals, for example, the lithium, cobalt, nickel, etc., which are needed by the electric vehicle industry in India. And now the Australian Prime Minister has put in place a roadmap also for the two countries. The roadmap identifies the sectors where the two countries can collaborate. For example, the developments in clean energy, education and skills, the agribusiness and tourism especially. The other cooperation areas include energy. The two countries have put in place a civil nuclear cooperation agreement. It was signed in 2014 because India wants the uranium, for which Australia has large resources. They have also signed a renewable energy partnership, and India gives 10 million Australian dollars to the Pacific Island countries under the International Solar Alliance. The two countries cooperate at various multilateral forums also. For example, the Indian Ocean Rim Association, ASEAN Regional Forum, Asia Pacific Partnership on Climate and Clean Development, and the East Asia Summits, etc. And Australia also argues for the membership of India at the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation and the United Nations Security Council as well. In terms of education, both the countries have put in place a qualification recognition mechanism so that the degrees of Indians which they have obtained in India will be recognized in Australia, and the degrees provided by the Australian universities are recognized in India, and the Australian universities are setting up campuses in the gift city in Gujarat as well. In terms of technology, the two countries cooperate in the research funds. For example, there is an Australia-India Strategic Research Fund. There are cooperations in the field of science, shipbuilding, as well as in the space sector. When we look at the developments in the people-to-people ties, Australia provides for the Maitri scholarships for the Indian students there, and also put in place the Future Skills Initiative as well. But there are certain challenges in the India-Australia relations. For example, the visa issues that the Indian students face, which is delayed, and the visa processes should be expedited. Likewise, the two countries have difference in opinions regarding the Ukraine issue. Australia explicitly criticizes Russia for the invasion of Ukraine, whereas India has closer ties with Russia, and this difference of opinions may affect the cooperation in Quad as well, for which both the countries are member. And there is simultaneously the China factor which is at play, because China is at unease because of the deepening cooperation between India and Australia. And the uranium supply which India wants from Australia, the progress there has been very low. And there has been attacks on the Indians in Australia, racist attacks, and also the attacks on the temples in Australia. And there are allegations that there are Khalistani supporters in Australia, which the Australian government should tackle. The tax law of Australia needs changes, because the Australian government levies taxes on the offshore incomes of the Indian firms which are providing technical services in Australia, which India is wary of. And there is the issue of the Adani coal mine in Australia also, against which there were protests in Australia. Now, what are the suggestions in this regard? How can India move forward to build better and deeper cooperation with Australia? One, we need to pursue an active diplomacy. We need to pursue in areas where we have common interests. For example, the tackling of China, Pakistan, the cooperation with respect to Afghanistan, the cooperation in countering terrorism, ensuring maritime security in the Indo-Pacific region. Both the countries can deepen the cooperation in the existing areas, for example, science, space and sports, and we can explore the signing of the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement at the soonest date. Now, there is a mains practice question also. Discuss the significance of India-Australia relations, highlighting the key areas of cooperation. What are the challenges that both the countries face in further strengthening their ties? Please try to write it. Now, the next article is related to India-Afghanistan relations. The context behind it is a write-up that has appeared in the Hindu. The author has claimed that the Indian government is building closer ties with the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. He has cited the meeting between the Foreign Secretary of India and a Taliban minister in Dubai. So we will discuss the significance of Afghanistan, the areas of engagement between India and Afghanistan, and the challenges that India-Afghanistan relations face. This is important in GS2 under the topic India and its neighborhood relations. First, let's have a look at the map of Afghanistan. Afghanistan is a strategically located country. It is landlocked and shares its boundaries with Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Iran, Pakistan, as well as India. With India, it shares the boundary with the Pakistan-occupied Kashmir region. That is, the region is under the occupation of Pakistan, but Afghanistan and India do share a land boundary also. Afghanistan has served as a bridge to the Central Asian region, a bridge between South Asia and Central Asia ever since the ancient times, and it has fostered the trade between the two regions, the cultural exchanges between the two regions, as well as promoting the political alliances in Central Asia and South Asia. But it has also served as a hotspot for the great power rivalries. Political scholars say that Afghanistan has been a graveyard for the great powers. For example, the Soviet invasion in 1980s, after that the US coming in, both had to leave Afghanistan with little to show. Now let's also look at the historical ties between India and Afghanistan. When we look at the ancient times, we had links with Afghanistan region because of the trade during the times of Indus Valley civilization. There were cultural exchanges with that region. Afghanistan was also lying on the Silk Route, promoting trade with that region. We have a shared heritage as well. For example, the Gandhar civilization in the modern day Afghanistan influenced the Buddhist sculptors, for example, the Bamiyan Buddha. Likewise, the religious epics in India, they have mentions of Afghanistan. For example, Mahabharata, Rig Veda, they mention Afghanistan. Likewise, in the medieval era also, there were links. For example, the Islamic empires were there in the medieval era. During the times of Ahmad Shah Durrani, Afghanistan even became a regional empire. During the times of Mughals, it influenced the Indian art and architecture. For example, Babur brought into India Indo-Persian art, architecture and literature. Likewise, during the times of British, there were the Anglo-Afghan wars. The British were fighting the Anglo-Afghan wars because they wanted Afghanistan as a buffer state against a probable Russian invasion into Southern Asia. Likewise, the Afghanistan wanted autonomy for the Pashtuns. Therefore, at the time of partition, it did not even recognize Pakistan because some of the Pashtuns were living in the territory of Pakistan. Post-independence, India signed a friendship treaty with Afghanistan, the Indo-Afghan Friendship Treaty in 1950. But there were the times of Soviet invasion in the 1980s. During the times of Soviet invasion, India supported the Soviet-backed Afghan government, whereas Pakistan and USA supported the Mujahideen forces during the Soviet invasion era. Then there was the hijacking of an Indian Airlines flight 814 in 1999. But post-2000, the relationship improved. There was even the signing of a strategic partnership agreement in 2011. But now Taliban is back in power. So what is the significance of Afghanistan for India? One, it serves as a gateway for India to Central Asia. The Central Asian region is energy rich, it is mineral rich. For example, the Tapi pipeline to get natural gas from the Central Asian region. It will help India in countering the influence of Pakistan. A stable Afghanistan is not in the interest of Pakistan. It reduces the strategic depth of Pakistan. Likewise, we will be able to utilize Chabahar better because through Chabahar, we will be able to ensure trade with Afghanistan and the Central Asian region. And that is why we have built the Jairanj-Dilaram highway connecting Afghanistan to the Iran border. It will help India in ensuring regional stability and security because we need cooperation in ensuring that the cross-border terrorism is lesser. For example, the Haqqani network. It operates from inside Pakistan, but it conducts terror strikes in Afghanistan. And it destabilizes the India-Pakistan border also. For example, there is a nexus between the Taliban and Pakistan which is alleged, which may destabilize the Kashmir region. Likewise, we need cooperation from Afghanistan in the economic sector also. For that, we have put in place an air freight corridor as well. And Afghanistan has significant mineral resources. For example, it has lithium, copper, rare earth minerals also. We need cooperation in the people-to-people segment as well. For example, we have goodwill investments in Afghanistan to generate goodwill among the Afghan people. For example, the development of infrastructure, like the investments in the building of the Afghanistan Parliament, investments in the building of the Salma Dam, which contributes to hydropower generation in Afghanistan. Likewise, the building of hospitals in Afghanistan, as well as providing scholarships to the Afghan students in India to promote cooperation in education. And India provides food grains to Afghanistan, vaccines during the times of the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as investments in the high-impact community development projects to further build upon the goodwill for India in Afghanistan. There are about 14,000 Afghan students also who are studying and living in India. Now, what are the areas of engagement between India and Afghanistan? The areas were identified through the strategic partnership agreement which was signed between the two countries. India was providing assistance to rebuild infrastructure in Afghanistan. India wanted the peace process in Afghanistan to be Afghan-led, Afghan-owned, broad-based and an inclusive process to ensure that the peace is long-lasting and there is reconciliation among all the stakeholders in Afghanistan. India also provided duty-free access to the Afghan goods if they are exported to the Indian market. There was the Heart of Asia process also, known as the Istanbul process. But now after the coming of Taliban, that is in a closet now. It included the political consultations, India supported in the confidence building measures, the cooperation with regional organizations also. India was taking up reconstruction efforts in Afghanistan before the coming of Taliban. And India was even cooperating in the defense also. For example, we were training the security forces of Afghanistan. We even gifted the Mi-25 attack helicopters to Afghanistan before the coming of Taliban. Now, what are the challenges that the relations between the two countries face? The pain points include the political instability in Afghanistan. In 2021, Taliban took over and the reconstruction efforts, the building of infrastructure has taken the backstage now, and India had to evacuate Indians from Afghanistan through Operation Devi Shakti. There is the Pakistan angle also, because there are quarters which believe that there is an influence of Pakistan over the Taliban and it promotes the cross-border terrorism, trying to destabilize Kashmir especially. Simultaneously, there is a geographical barrier also, because we do not have the land access to Afghanistan. We have to rely upon the Chabahar port to get access to Afghanistan indirectly, and the air freight corridor is not an all-inclusive solution to provide access geographically. Plus, Afghanistan is part of the Golden Crescent, which comprises of Iran, Afghanistan and Pakistan, and it is a region where drugs are produced and smuggled even into India as well. Now, what are the suggestions to improve India-Afghanistan relations? One, we can go for a strategic recalibration. That is, we should not officially recognize Taliban regime. Rather, we should call for the putting in place of an all-inclusive democratic government in Afghanistan. But we can engage with all the actors and we can engage in the aid diplomacy. That is, we should focus more on humanitarian aid rather than military intervention, which the great powers have done in the past. And we should tread cautiously. We can start the limited embassy operations to ensure that the aid efforts can be taken up. Simultaneously, we can go for the high-level engagements. For example, the meeting with the Taliban ministers. And we can adopt a principled approach. For example, we can adopt the approach in line with the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2593 to promote peace, counter-terrorism and the protection of human rights in Afghanistan. There was a previous year question also regarding India-Afghanistan, which was asked by UPSC regarding the withdrawal of international security assistance forces from Afghanistan. There is a mains practice question as well. India-Afghanistan relations have been characterized by deep historical, cultural and strategic ties. Analyze the significance of this bilateral relationship, highlighting the key challenges faced in the recent years. What steps can India take to strengthen its engagement with Afghanistan? Please try to write it. Now, the next article is related to electoral reforms. This is important in GS2 under the topic Salient Features of Representation of People's Act. Before coming to the article, let's have a look at some of the significant electoral reforms taken up in India. To ensure transparency, the government came up with the electoral bonds scheme. That was to reduce the cash donations made to the political parties. The Supreme Court in the Lok Prahari case came up with the guideline that the candidates of the elections, they should mandatorily declare their income sources. That is, the candidates contesting the elections of the parliament or the state legislative assemblies have to declare their income sources. To increase the voter participation, various reforms were taken up. For example, the voting age was lowered from 21 years to 18 years through the 61st Constitutional Amendment Act. The postal ballot was introduced and the categories of people who could vote through post was also increased. The Election Laws Amendment Bill 2021 proposed that the voter I-cards can be linked with the Aadhaar cards to reduce the duplication. The technology was introduced in the voting process through the introduction of EVMs, electronic voting machines, the VVPAT, that is the voter verifiable paper audit trail, that was to reduce the frauds in the voting process. The nota option was introduced, that is the electorate can choose none of the above option as well. The faith in the electoral process, the sanctity of the electoral process was maintained by the introduction of the anti-defection law by the parliament. Through the anti-defection law, it is ensured that the legislators once elected by the electorate cannot hop between parties. It ensures a stability in the government which is formed once. And the politicians are also prosecuted if they are committing any criminal acts. For example, the Supreme Court observed that there should be the establishment of special courts so that there are the expedition of the trials of the criminal cases against the politicians. To create a level playing field between the various candidates and the political parties, the Election Commission introduced the Model Code of Conduct. The Model Code of Conduct introduces restrictions on the new announcements. They cannot be made by the government when the MCC is in force, or the grants which cannot be given by the government. And if there is any violation of the Model Code of Conduct, then the citizens can use the C-Vigil app to report the violations of the Model Code of Conduct. Likewise, there are guidelines which are put in place on the exit polls. The exit polls can only be published after the final phase of the elections is over, so that the voters in the subsequent phases of elections are not unduly influenced. Likewise, a ceiling on the election expenditure was put in place. For example, for the Lok Sabha elections, it was 50 to 70 lakhs depending upon the state. Now, coming to the article, there are allegations that the electoral rolls were manipulated and the epic numbers were duplicate in the recent assembly elections conducted in Delhi and Maharashtra. So what is the legal framework which manages the electoral process in India? Under Article 324, the Election Commission is vested with the powers of superintendence, direction and control over the elections and the preparation of electoral rolls in India. The electoral rolls are prepared under the Representation of Peoples Act 1950, and the rules for voter registration are provided under the Registration of Electors Rules 1960. Let's have a look at the evolution of the voting process in India also. In the 1952 and 1957 elections, separate ballot boxes were used for each candidate, and the voters dropped simply a blank ballot into the preferred candidate's box. In 1962, the ballot papers were introduced with the candidates' names and symbols. And in 2004, EVMs were introduced in all the Lok Sabha constituencies. In 2019, 100% VVPAT slips were also provided. Now, what are the key issues in the electoral process in India? With respect to EVMs and VVPAT, a PIL was filed. It demanded that paper ballots should be used, but it has been dismissed by the Supreme Court. And it demanded that if EVMs are used, then 100% VVPAT EVM matching should be done. The current practice is that 5 machines, 5 EVMs are matched per assembly segment. This demand was also rejected by the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court has allowed the verification of 5% EVM microcontroller memory chips in case there are tampering suspicions, in case it is suspected that the microcontroller memory chips of the EVM has been tampered. Regarding the electoral rolls, there are allegations of manipulation, allegations of bogus and fake voters in Maharashtra and Delhi Legislative Assembly elections. There are duplicate epic number allegations in West Bengal, Gujarat, Haryana and Punjab. The Election Commission has attributed these duplicates to the earlier decentralized epic allotment system. Regarding the campaign process also, there are certain issues. For example, the star campaigners, they use abusive language, they appeal based upon caste and communal grounds, and they go for unsubstantiated allegations against the opposition party members. Regarding election expenditure, again, there is a breach in the candidate expenditure limits, and there are no limits on the party spending. And it was estimated that during the 2024 Lok Sabha elections, the party spending was to the tune of 1 lakh crore rupees. Simultaneously, there is a criminalization of politics also, because as per the data, 46% of the MPs in 2024 have criminal cases against them. 31% have serious charges also, including rape, murder, etc. So what are the proposed reforms now? Regarding the EVMs and the VVPAT, we can increase the sample size for the matching between the EVM and the VVPAT scientifically. We can use the totalizer machines to aggregate votes from 14 EVMs before counting. And we can use the Supreme Court directive. The candidates can resort to the Supreme Court directive to ask for the verification of 5% EVMs microcontroller chips in case there are suspicions regarding the tampering of the microcontroller chips itself. Regarding the cleanup of electoral rolls, we can link the Aadhaar with the EPIC cards after addressing the privacy concerns, which is the key issue. And we can remove the duplicate EPIC numbers and ensure unique voter IDs. Regarding the campaign process also, we can recommend certain reforms. For example, regarding star campaigners, the Election Commission may consider revoking the star campaigner status if there are serious violations of the model code of conduct by that particular star campaigner. And we can use the paragraph 16A of the symbols order to ensure that the Election Commission suspends or withdraw the recognition of parties who are violating the model code of conduct. Regarding the election expenditure, the laws can be amended to include party financial assistance within the candidate expenditure limits. And we can introduce a ceiling of the political party expenditure also. Regarding the criminalization of politics, a strict enforcement must be ensured for the Supreme Court's directives for candidates and parties to declare their criminal antecedents, and it should be done 3 times before the elections. Now, the next article is related to CAG and the reforms required in the appointment of CAG. This is important in GS2 under the topic Appointments to various constitutional posts, powers, functions and responsibilities. Before coming to the article, let's discuss the Article 148 of the Indian Constitution, which provides for the Comptroller and Auditor General. As per Article 148, the CAG is appointed by the President under his hand and seal. The CAG can be removed only in a manner like that of a judge of the Supreme Court, and the CAG has to subscribe before the President an oath or affirmation which is set out in the 3rd schedule to the Constitution. The salary and other conditions of the service of CAG are determined by the Parliament, but the salary cannot be varied to his disadvantage after his appointment. Also, the CAG shall not be eligible for further reappointment under the government once he ceases to hold his office. The administrative expenses of the office of CAG are charged upon the Consolidated Fund of India. Now, the CAG serves as the guardian of the public purse because he maintains transparency and accountability in the management of public funds at both central government level and the state government level. Therefore, CAG helps in upholding the financial discipline and functions as the check and balance in a democratic system which is required. Now, what are the constitutional provisions regarding CAG apart from Article 148? The duties and powers of the CAG are determined by the Parliament as per Article 149. The CAG maintains the accounts of the Union and the state governments as per the form prescribed as per Article 150. The CAG submits the reports on the Union accounts to the President under Article 151 and then it is placed before the Parliament. The report on the state accounts is prepared by the CAG and presented to the Governor and then it is placed before the respective state legislative assembly. The CAG also certifies the net proceeds of taxes and duties under Article 279, which is binding. The CAG duties, powers and conditions of service are provided under the CAG Act 1971. It prescribes that the tenure of CAG can extend up to 6 years or up to the age of 65 years, whichever is earlier. The removal of CAG happens like that of a Supreme Court judge and the resignation of the CAG can be addressed to the President. The service conditions of CAG cannot be varied to the disadvantage of CAG after his appointment. Now coming to the article, the plea has been filed in the court challenging the role of only the centre in the appointment of the CAG. The plea has argued that absolute control by the centre over the appointment process would gravely affect the independence of a constitutional authority which functions as a watchdog over the financial expenditure and the accountability of the union and state governments and even the Panchayati Raj institutions. And therefore, the CAG must be appointed in consultation with a non-partisan selection committee. The plea proposes that the committee may comprise of the Prime Minister, the Leader of Opposition and the Chief Justice of India. And there has even been allegations of deviation in the CAG's work, including on the reports on the pose in Maharashtra audits and a steady decline on the audits on the union government, which the plea has claimed. Now, the next article is related to climate change and its impact on wheat production in India. This is important in GS3 under the topic climate change and also in economy under major crops and cropping pattern in India. There has been a record-breaking heat in India. February 2025 has been recorded as the warmest February in 124 years. The Indian Meteorological Department has even predicted above normal temperatures and more heat waves in March itself. This heat is coinciding with the wheat harvest season and therefore the crop yields are threatened. Let's first have a look at the wheat production in India. The primary wheat growing regions in India are the northwest Indo-Gangetic plains, that is Uttar Pradesh, Punjab, Haryana and Madhya Pradesh. And the growing season extends from October to April. It is sown from October to December and it is harvested from February to April. When we look at the 2024-25 production, there was a record target of 115 million tons, but procurement of 26 million tons only against the target of 34 million tons procurement. The export of wheat from India was banned in May 2022 itself. Now, when we look at the growth stages, they are described by the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization for the wheat production. The first stage is the germination to emergence, that is the seedling development when the seed first time sprouts. And the growth stage after that is the emergence to the double ridge, that is the vegetative growth. The next growth stage is the double ridge to anthesis, that is the reproductive stage, and it is highly heat sensitive. And the final growth stage is that of the filling of the grain to maturity when it is finally harvested. Now, what is the impact of heat on wheat? One, it affects the wheat growth by altering photosynthesis, respiration and nutrient relations. The effects of heat include the early flowering and faster ripening. It reduces the grain filling period, leading to lower yield. And the lower starch accumulation leads to lighter grains and reduced yield because of the heat. And the higher protein content is there, but lower starch affects the milling quality and therefore the market prices of the wheat yield. Simultaneously, there has been the warming of the Indian Ocean also. Due to the Indian Ocean warming, the accelerated warming, a near permanent heat wave is predicted by 2100, which will further affect the crop yield. The marine heat waves are expected to increase from 20 days a year to 250 days a year. Simultaneously, the monsoon patterns are altering. The altering monsoon patterns delay the Kharif crop season and affecting the Rabi crop sowing and growth as well. Now, what can be the adaptation and mitigation strategies? One, the policy measures may include the adoption of heat-resistant wheat varieties. We can adjust the sowing dates to avoid the heat waves. We can sow it earlier. And we can provide financial support to the farmers. We can provide crop insurance to ensure that they can stop or mitigate their losses. And we can provide improved weather monitoring and advisories to the farmers so that they are able to mitigate the losses due to climate change and the vagaries of weather. Simultaneously, the farmers, they can change their practices, for example, avoiding the overusage of fertilizers and pesticides due to heat stress. They can adopt the climate resilient agriculture practices, the wheat varieties. The long-term solutions will include the efficient resource management. We need to manage the fertilizers and the pesticides used. We need to introduce improved yield varieties with shorter growth duration, which do not take as many months to grow, ripen, and finally be ready for harvest. We can focus on reducing the yield gaps and improving production also. Now, the next article is related to the National Green Tribunal. This is important in GS2 under the topic statutory, regulatory, and various quasi-judicial bodies. Before coming to the article, let's have a brief background regarding the NGT also. It's a statutory body which was established as per the NGT Act 2010, and it ensures effective and expeditious disposal of the cases which require environmental protection, conservation of the forests, conservation of natural resources, and it has an expertise in such disputes, in the adjudication of disputes which require multidisciplinary issues to be resolved. It is not bounded by the procedures of the Civil Procedure Code. Rather, the functioning of NGT is guided by the principles of natural justice. It has a mandate to dispose of the applications or the appeals filed in the NGT finally within 6 months of the filing. The principal place of sitting of the NGT is in New Delhi, whereas it has benches in Bhopal, Kolkata, Pune and Chennai also. When we look at the composition of the National Green Tribunal, the chairperson is a retired Supreme Court judge. The judicial members of NGT are usually the retired High Court judges. The expert members are usually professionals who have 15 years of experience in environment and forest conservation. Let's also have a look at some of the landmark judgments given by the National Green Tribunal in the past. In Almitra Patel versus Union of India in 2012, the NGT observed that there should be a total ban on the open burning of waste on any land. Even in the landfills, the open burning of waste is not allowed. In Srinagar Bandh Apda Sangharsh Samiti versus Alaknanda Hydropower, the NGT observed that the Alaknanda Hydropower has to pay compensation to the Uttarakhand floods caused. This compensation which was awarded by the NGT is based upon the polluter pays principle, that is the person who is causing that damage has to pay the compensation for that. In the Art of Living Yamuna River Foundation case in 2016, the NGT again imposed a fine of 5 crores on the foundation for the environmental damage caused by an event conducted by it. In Ganga pollution case in 2017, the NGT directed the state governments to set up sewage treatment plants and to regulate industrial discharges also. Now coming to the article, the Supreme Court has set aside an NGT order which had restrained the Auroville Foundation from moving ahead with the proposed township project. The project had not got environmental clearance. The Supreme Court has observed that we need to strike a balance between the right to development and the right to clean environment. The court observed that it is true that precautionary principle and polluter pays principle, they are part of the environmental law. It is also true that the right to clean environment is a guaranteed fundamental right which is derived from Article 14 and Article 21. But there is a right to development also which we can say is derived and claims priority under the fundamental rights of Article 14, 19 and 21. Now the next article is related to the capability of docking and undocking of satellites achieved by ISRO. This is important in GS3 under the topic Achievements of Indians in Science and Technology, Indigenization of Technology and Developing New Technology. ISRO has undocked 2 satellites now. India becomes the 4th country after USA, Russia and China. This was achieved through the experimental SPADEX mission. 2 satellites were orbiting in the 470 km circular orbit. The 2 satellites were brought together from 20 km apart and they were joined using an extended locking mechanism. This docking system was androgynous, that is, it was identical on both satellites. Both satellites could act as the chaser during the docking process. This docking system had 2 motors, whereas in the international docking system standard, it is usually 24 motors. Post-docking, ISRO demonstrated the power sharing and commanded the satellites as a single composite structure. So what is this space docking? This is a process of joining 2 fast-moving spacecrafts in a same orbit. It is extremely complicated because precision is required in the alignment and the matching of the velocity of the 2 satellites. Now, what is the purpose of this docking and undocking of satellites in the space? Because we'll be able to assemble heavy spacecrafts in the space. For example, the International Space Station, which can't be launched as a single object from the Earth, and will be able to transport astronauts from Earth and will be able to send them supplies to the space station, for example. And because there are weight limitations, the heavy spacecrafts cannot be launched in one piece. Therefore, docking and undocking capability will be important. It will be important for our future missions. For example, we want to launch an Indian space station by 2035, a human moon mission which is targeted by 2040. A Chandrayaan 4 will use docking to bring back lunar soil and rock samples. Now, when we look at the history of space docking, it has been done earlier, the first time by NASA in 1966. It was done in Gemini 8, which was commanded by Neil Armstrong, and it was manually docked with Agena target vehicle. The first autonomous docking happened in 1967. The USSR's Cosmos 186 and Cosmos 188 spacecrafts were docked. China also achieved the capabilities. In 2011, it achieved the unmanned docking capability, and in 2012, it achieved the crewed docking capability. Thank you.